On that Tuesday, welcome to Tuesday Live. Omini Odan is my name. Few days ago, President Muhammadu Buhari sent a request to the National Assembly seeking approval to borrow $29.96 billion to address the nation's significant economic difficulties through a variety of policy approach. This is based on the understanding that an effective economic stimulus will raise demand in the short run while improving the capacity of the economy to supply goods and services in the long run, ultimately to achieve active productive capacity of the people across board. The sweet bitter taste of the current economic calls for injection of heavy funds to enable the government stimulate the economy by spending on projects to address unmet infrastructure needs. A substantial public investment on infrastructure, no doubt, will create new jobs, create new skilled people, and create an engine of growth in many areas. The argument that Nigeria has high external debt already may not entirely represent reality, since the productive capacity of the nation has a lot of shortfalls far from our real economic potentials. With carefully crafted details focusing on mining, power, health, agriculture, water and the educational sector, the President will be achieving a new world based through adequate provision of infrastructure needs necessary and consistent for domestic and global investors. Tonight on the program Tuesday Live is focusing on $29.96 billion economic stimulus infrastructure plan with reports dotting across the country. But first, this background report together by Benny Adams.
President Muhammadu Buhari had on Thursday requested the National Assembly to approve $22.72 billion of foreign borrowings tied to infrastructure and other projects. The letter dated November 26 was read by the leadership of both chambers of the National Assembly, where Mr. President requested the lower house to reconsider and approve the external borrowing plan for 2016 to 2018, as well as projects tied to the funds, with plans that 40% of its borrowing comes from offshore sources by 2019 to lower cost and fund budget, as the government plans to spend 10.33 trillion naira next year.
To increase our GDP, stimulate the economy, provide employment, bridge the infrastructural deficit that we've all been talking about, that will take us trillions and trillions and trillions of naira to meet.
The new borrowings are tied to projects supported by the World Bank, African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and the German Development Bank, as well as China Exim Bank. This move by the President has generated conversations across the country for and against, bearing in mind that no country in the world survives without borrowing.
Well, personally, I don't see any problem with it. After all, if you look at the level of decay in our infrastructure, I think it's worth it. And if you look at the level of infrastructure development that are going around in the country, I think it's worth it, because that shows a kind of seriousness on the side of government, because government want to put these things right so that investors that can attract investors into the country.
By diversification and thorough thinking through of needs, we could address our problem by not extending or increasing our debt profile.
Borrowing is not a problem. What you do with what you borrow is where the problem is. If it is spent on infrastructures and we see that the money is well spent, there will be no problem. But if it is not, because of the repercussion of paying, already we are paying with we're using 1/4 of our budget to service loan. Add $29 billion to it, and the interest rate are attached to it. If there's nothing on ground to show for this borrowing, it could be disastrous for tomorrow.
According to the letter, outstanding projects in the plan that were not approved by the legislature before now are critical to the delivery of government policies and programs relating to power, mining, roads, agriculture, health, water, and the education sector.
A ground by Benny Adams sets the tone for Tuesday Live tonight, and the focus once again is the Economic Stimulus Infrastructure Plan. Well, within the program tonight, we shall be dotting the landscape of Nigeria, where we have done a couple of reports within the sectors in the country, across the country. And Tuesday Live, as you know, has a character. At some point, the lines will be open and you put your calls through, raise your concerns, ask your questions. Also, our Twitter handle at Tuesday Live NTA is open. Send your tweets. As much as time allows, we'll address them. And I must assure you, I have a team of wonderful guests, experts that will raise your concern. Economic Stimulus Infrastructure Plan. Tonight, to my immediate left, I have the Senior Special Assistant to Mr. President on Public Affairs, Ajiri Ngalale. Good to have you on the program.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Emeka Okengu is the development economist, former member, 30 years Infrastructure Master Plan, and former consultant to the World Bank. Good to have you on the program.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Also, Professor Ken Ife, development economist and macroeconomic policy analyst. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Ayobami Ayolowo is a political economist and public affairs analyst. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Economic stimulus and infrastructure plan. This has generated a lot of conversation the last few days in the country, but it is very clear. Let me take off from I remember vividly, gentlemen, taking off from the SSA. Shortly after elections and the government was inaugurated, a few red tops were all over the country, and two core suggestions across board was Nigeria urgently needs a massive economic stimulus plan. And one of which said, as a result of increasing spending in sectors, projects and programs, the president should boost the economy, not boosting the economy, but generate employment. Now, they also raised the concern that he should set up a solid economic team. Now, so far, where are we? Has he tailored towards that direction?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Let me just start by acknowledging the concerns of our people. We have heard from our people around the country, particularly in my engagements. I've heard from them, and they are concerned about the idea of taking out new borrowings to the tune of $29.96 billion. It is a real concern for them, and I think a lot of the reason why there is a concern has been we have seen this trend, particularly in the social media and the traditional media, of sheer falsehoods and misconceptions around the current state of the nation's debt. And I want to be very clear about what I'm talking about. If you go, and this is all verifiable on the DMO website for any Nigerian who wants to fact check what I'm saying. In 2010, our national debt, that's inclusive of federal government, states, external borrowing, as well as domestic borrowing, total national debt was $35 billion US. By 2014, it had ballooned to $67.7 billion US. 2010 to 2014 also happened to be the time when we had the highest revenues in our nation's history at approximately $400 billion in oil and gas revenues within that period, yet we borrowed $32 billion during that period. Now, some people have made the claim that President Muhammadu Buhari has doubled the national debt in 4 years. Some people have also made the claim that President Muhammadu Buhari has borrowed more in the last 4 years than has been borrowed in the last 30 years, some of these false claims. I want to be very, very clear about the fact that right now our current national debt is 25.7 trillion naira. Obviously, in dollar terms, that's at about $83 billion. We know that from 2014 to date, we've seen an addition of approximately $18 billion at a time of low oil revenues when we've actually needed the borrowing in order to fund capital projects across sectors. So I wanted to just make it very clear that these things are absolutely false, and Nigerians should not allow some of these falsehoods to affect their judgment as it relates to this new $30 billion economic stimulus infrastructure plan. Now, with that said, what are the things that Nigerians are going to look forward to, and why is it that there is this urgency that this is the time for us to implement this plan? We need to understand that we're not living in a silo in this country. We are part of a global village, and we also know that African states have signed up to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That is obviously going to entail about over $1 trillion in new investment that's going to be flooding this continent. Now, all of the African nations are literally posturing with themselves, jostling for position, trying to put themselves in a position to attract the kind of industries that are going to be coming in and to take advantage of the tens of millions, in fact hundreds of millions of new jobs that are going to be created across value chains and sectors upon implementation of the Free Trade Agreement. That is why, when we look at South Africa, that is obviously far ahead in terms of stable power supply, in terms of roads, bridges, air, and seaports. They have the soft infrastructure, the regulatory environment, and all of that. We are competing with these countries, and we know that this administration has inherited decades, 40, 50 years worth of neglect, both in soft and hard infrastructure. What that means is if we are going to court that investment effectively and make sure that we don't just end up as a dumping ground, but instead become a choice destination for factories and industries, we have to put that infrastructure on ground in a way that we never have before, in the most urgent fashion possible, to ensure that we are ready to capture all of the industries that are going to be flooding into Africa over the next 5 to 15 years. The time is now. Now, in terms of the specifics of this package, you're going across multiple sectors. You touched on it in the intro. You have education, you have mining, you have rails, you have roads, you have even in terms of e-governance, you have social investment, you have MSMEs development, and we're going to get into the specifics of all that. But I think if I want to just pinpoint to start out the conversation some of the very critical projects, I would say that we would look at the rail sector, where this infrastructure plan is going to put the finishing touch on the Lagos to Kano rail line. We know that Lagos-Ibadan is at a very advanced stage. In fact, Mr. President has now moved that rail line from Iju into Apapa port to decongest the ports and all of that. We're now dealing with the Ibadan to Kano segment, which is now in this infrastructure package, $5.53 billion at a low interest rate of about 2.75%, with about a 20-year maturity and about a moratorium of approximately 7 years until we begin repayment. We're very happy with the terms of that deal. We would also look at the coastal rail line, where we have a segment that's going to be running from Calabar into Port Harcourt, deep down into One Port, because Mr. President, in his wisdom, has seen that we need to diversify our port infrastructure away from Apapa port, which is overly utilized. So now we're going to have that rail line going into One through Port Harcourt from Calabar. And that project is about $3.4 billion, and it's part of a larger 6-phase rail line that's going to run from Lagos to Calabar. But we're going to start there because we need to be able to evacuate goods from the south and eastern ports to effectively ensure that industries coming in can bring in their goods in a cost-productive and efficient manner. The third one I would mention is the Abuja Mass Rail Transit Project, which is phase 2, which is essentially going to extend the rail project that runs from Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport into the city center, now from the city center into the outskirts of Abuja, Nyanya, Maraba side, where you have massive grouping of civilian population, so that we can decongest the expressway there and also slow down the rate at which we have these outskirts communities moving into the city center, causing congestion, etc., etc. So we think that by bringing in some of these very critical transportation projects at the low interest with long maturities and even longer moratoriums, that we're absolutely serving the economic interests of the country moving forward.
Okay. Now, Dr. Kingu, 39 emergency projects is what this whole thing is to finance. He has touched on a couple of them. Let's speak to the agricultural sector.
No, let's speak to the issues.
The issues, yes,
yeah,
this part of it.
I'll get to the agricultural sector because it's important you place this right. What are you borrowing for? What is borrowing? And each time people talk about borrowing, do you know how much China has borrowed and how much China is owing? Yet, it's seen as the largest economy. Do you know the debt profile of the United States of America? I wanted to bring that intro so that we can be able to actually begin to focus on what the real issues are. Because if you're looking at it as just agriculture alone, you might miss the mark.
It's one of it.
Okay, I'll tell you why you might miss the mark. The SSA had talked about the rail infrastructure. The rail infrastructure actually runs on load value. And what is load value? Your load value will come from your agriculture. To make it simple so that everybody can follow us, you're talking about ship loads. If you look at when we were the biggest or when we were exporting agricultural goods and services, the rail lines were designed. There's no major city in this country that didn't start as a warehouse or some kind of warehousing facility. And there was no rail line that didn't connect to that major city and that didn't connect to the sea or to the seaports. So what's important is that I have had this conversation and I say I'm a development person. And people must be able to put things into their right perspectives. I think the money government is asking, if I were to advise government, I would say, don't be in a hurry to present this and then come back to look for more. I think what government should do is to think this thing through based on what you now call the socio-economic realities on the ground. One is the report by the World Bank. The two things that came out of that report is that if you're going to remain a nation, okay, that is going to be moving from where you're supposed to be moving to where you're supposed to be going, there are two things you must look at. One is productivity. And what is productivity? It is all about your infrastructure. Are you listening to me? Now, every country that is an investment destination is not an investment destination because it has a good name. It's an investment destination because it has infrastructure. So if you're going to be borrowing $1 trillion and tying them to projects, and this is what this loan thing, because I've read it, government is not saying give us this and we're thinking about what to do. They're saying give us this thing and there are projects already on ground. But I am saying no, government, don't look at these projects as infrastructure projects you're building. Look at them as infrastructure you must complete. Because if you started the second Niger Bridge and you're going to be needing $29 billion to do it, borrow $29 billion and do it. Otherwise, you can't unlock it. If you're going to be building the coastal rail lines that the SSA had mentioned and all this other infrastructure, the power infrastructure, please do not now start and stop. Because by the time you're coming to reevaluate, you might be needing money that's not going to be available. So for me, where I'm going to be taking it from is for Nigerians to please understand that there is nothing wrong with borrowing, but there is everything wrong in borrowing wrongly. And what is wrong borrowing is when, because of public pressure, let us first and foremost, take this little and then show to people that we can get it right. No. If we are going to be focusing on what you call the critical infrastructure, we need to now begin to now unlock our social infrastructure. Trust me, my brother, I think government should take this thing a little more deeper. So I am all for borrowing. I'm all for starting and finishing infrastructure projects. I'm all for making certain that you now tie it and now bring it to agriculture. What's agriculture? Agriculture is a science of animal and plants. But I thought you'd have been asking me about food security. And if you're talking about food security, you're taking it out of the realm of agriculture.
Holistically.
Beautiful. That's what I'm saying. I'm not taking it to the realm of technology.
Primary agro-allied.
Of technology. Okay? The moment what sustains you is your capacity to be able to produce food. And you need more than agriculture to be able to produce food. Okay? You need more than hoes and knives to be able to produce food. In fact, you need technology more than you need land to produce food. Technology costs money. So, if you're talking about us being self-sufficient in food production, for crying out loud, look at what's happening. Just border closure of 3 months. Almost every sector in the food chain is smiling to the banks. From the poultry farmers to the people who are making feed, to the people who are planting rice, to whatever it is you're talking about. Now imagine if you had now invested in the proper technologies and then the support infrastructure. Do you know what's going to be happening to your productivity? Imagine if we now invested, closing borders 30%, down on food importation in less than 2 months. Imagine what will happen if we invested in making certain that our refineries go back into stream and we were now value processing our crude, all the way to where it's supposed to be going. Sorry.
Okay, now let's proceed from where Dr. King was, Prof. From the perspective of inclusivity. Now,
we need to clear some grounds. We really have to clear some ground, and I'm glad that Dr. King has started it. First of all, there are three clear visions of Nigeria. There was the 2020 vision that we would hope to get to the position of number 20, by the year 2020, and with an aggregate GDP of $650 billion. As a matter of fact, in December 2014, we actually had $573 billion. We were almost there. We were number 21 until the problem came and we lost 60% of our revenue. But today, we're actually around 500 billion. So that's good news, and we're moving up. Then second vision dealt with 2030, where they expect that $1.64 trillion would be our GDP. Of course, our population would increase to 300 million people. And then the 2050 is looking at $6.4 trillion. That will make us number 10 in the world, well ahead of UK, Germany, no, not Germany, UK, Spain, Italy, others. The thing is that you can't envisage how we're going to get to those dreamland if you don't build infrastructure. Infrastructure is the key. And in fact, any investment you make in infrastructure has multiplier effect. So I couldn't actually tell you that if we invest the 30 billion, we'll have 30 billion in our GDP. No, it's going to multiply. So it has a multiplier effect. What can have a near direct effect is like 10% increase in infrastructure could increase the growth rate by 1%. That kind of thing. So if you look at that, that's more rule of the thumb. But I tell you something, GDP, investment in infrastructure, debt borrowed, those monies are moving targets. People should stop screaming that it is doubled. It's not. They are moving targets. What is more appropriate is percentage of the loan to GDP. Okay, in 2004, we had the highest debt to GDP ratio at 20%. That was the highest in 2004. And as you come down, 2005, it dropped to 11% because we settled our debt with 18 billion and forgiveness. Then 2010, it was 13%, 11, 17, 12, 16. The second highest was 2013 when it was 19.3%. And the figures, obviously, it was 64 billion, it was 40 billion, yeah. In 2017, yes, it was 70 billion. You may say it doubled, but it was actually 13.2% of GDP. Now, in 2017, I tell you something, even 2018 was 73 billion, which you mentioned, but as a debt to GDP, it was 20%. Now, 2019, even though it is 84 billion, 83.4 billion, right, it's still 18% of our GDP. So it's nowhere near the threshold. And let me tell you something. The Forbes in 2018 voted Nigeria as the best debt managed economy in Africa. They actually fell short of saying in the world, and I'll tell you why. They looked at three parameters. They looked at the country, their national debt, their foreign reserve, and their debt to GDP ratio. This same thing I'm mentioning. US had a national debt of $21 trillion and a foreign reserve of 125 billion, which is nearly 3 times our own. What is it? But their debt to GDP is 76%. Now, UK borrowed 2.3 trillion with a reserve of 164 billion with 89% debt to GDP. Now, China is, of course, the richest in this respect. They have 4.3 billion in debt, 8.1 billion in reserve, huge reserve, but they still have 41% debt to GDP. Now, when you now bring Nigeria, 73 billion in debt, 47 billion in reserve, chasing these other countries, and 21% debt to GDP. We're the lowest. By far, the same story with tax. No, where I'm coming.
It's lowest. But the issue this brings up is that there's no need for the scare. Now, if we are going to take 30, whatever billion, 20, add 30 billion to the current 83 billion. Now, that's going to give 100 and what? 113 billion. All right. Now, our GDP now is 143 trillion. Now, that is $468 billion. That, as a proportion of GDP, is 21%. So what is the screaming about? The benchmark is, we have a law, an extant law, 2007 Fiscal Responsibility Act. Now, that act says, the fact is this gave us only one benchmark. It says external budget deficit to GDP should not be more than 3%. Most of the countries got, even ECOWAS is 5% for convergence criteria. But the thing is, we've always kept below that. But it did not set, which is the job for the National Assembly to go and do. That's the first thing they should go and do. It didn't set the debt to GDP, external debt to GDP ratio. It didn't set domestic debt to GDP ratio. It didn't set debt servicing government income. It didn't set it. He left it to the National Assembly to do, and they haven't done it since 2007. They have to do this to provide a sensible guide for discussions of this nature.
Okay, beautiful. Now you have
now,
said, yes.
coming to ground zero. If we, I have looked at the list of what the government wanted to spend the 30 billion. Those things, I'm even surprised today. I'm surprised that package is on the table. The reason why I'm surprised is because Nigeria is no longer a low-income country. We're not entitled. We are not entitled to concessionary loans. For you to see concessionary loans of 1%, 1.2%, moratorium of 5-7 years, and giving you up to 12, 25 years, those things are not. We are not supposed to. Even the EU didn't even approve, even the GSP, they didn't even want to put us in. We are not even accepted because we are now in the middle income country. We're not entitled to this. Okay, so if we can still get this, what are you waiting for? And the debt strategy for the country was to shift from, because if you look at the bonds, some of the bonds are 7.8%, 8.7%, that were high. Then the federal government has been borrowing, domestic borrowing, 18%, 20%. I mean, that's too high. So the debt strategy under the AIGP plan says we have to remove from the balance of 40% external debt and 60% domestic debt. Moving from 19 to 40%. I'm bringing down from 79 to 60%. That is strategy. That alone gives you a net gain of 168 billion. Okay. Just by restructuring that. Secondly, wait a minute. Let's drop the facts. Then we have 2 hours.
Absolutely.
Let's drop the facts on the table. Then we can argue. Then now, we are moving away from this country bilateral loans. They are looking at the rates. Some of the rates are 5%, some of them are 7%. We are moving away from those and moving into a territory of development finance organizations where we can have this 1% and then blended with, some of them are blended finance with grant. 1%, 1.2, 1.07, and then you have all that moratorium, and then you have all that condition. You go in over there. That's where we want to go, where it will not have a major impact on our cash flow. Okay. Then with that, what you can now say is this. What is the law says external borrowing should be for capital projects. That's what the law, 2007 Fiscal Responsibility Act says. Okay. So what we should be saying is, in the assessment, in the debt sustainability assessment, which the DMO does, we should say to DMO, this first call in 2016 is 3 years old. So go and review. Just
a minute. Now that you've talked about the external borrowing for capital project, the focus tonight is the economic stimulus infrastructure plan. And we told you at the beginning that we'll go around the country, lay some reports to back up the topic tonight. I'll come to Ayobami. Let's take this first report on the power sector.
Nigeria, with an emerging economy standing tall on the African continent, pimping into global market, is somewhat impaired by stable electricity supply, making business owners to wear long faces as a result of huge money spent on daily basis for generating sales. This is just a flash on the pan in the search of reliable electricity by business owners and households. Despite the privatization and unbundling of Power Holding Company of Nigeria, PHC, in 2013, blackout still prouds itself in many parts of the country, crippling industries and small and medium-scale enterprises. 59 years after independence, power supply is still hovering between 3,500 megawatts and 5,000 megawatts, a situation sector players consider as a drop of water with an estimated population of 200 million people.
As more power is made available to industry in particular, more jobs will be created, more Nigerians will be empowered.
There is a ray of hope in sight as the government at the center targets to further invest additional 1.65 trillion naira in the sector with additional funding from donor agencies. The intervention fund is for the completion of ongoing power projects in parts of the country.
We are also having the highest grant that has ever been seen in the history of the sector. If you look at European Union, they gave us 25 million euro grant. JICA gave us $13 million, where we built the capacitor bank here in Abuja and in Kefi. They have given another grant of 21 million dollars to upgrade the capacity of Apapa and Akamba substation. Most of the time, donors find it difficult to finance transmission line. But you see, the AFD, which is French Development Agency, became the pioneer that in financing a greenfield transmission line in Nigeria.
Sugeru Power Plant in Niger State, Azura Power Plant in Edo State, Afan Power Plant in Rivers State, and the Kashimbila Hydro Power Plant in Taraba State, expected to generate estimated 2,000 megawatts, bringing the federal government 10,000 megawatts target by 2020 to reality.
Our next level movement in this power sector is to make sure that all these projects have been completed. We are going around to complete the project and also to commission the project before the end of this term.
For those in the business of power, massive investment in the sector and the recent request by the executive to the Senate for reconsideration and approve the external borrowing plan of $29.96 billion to fund critical infrastructure, including the landmark power projects in Abuja. Joshua Ojito, NTA News.
The report coming from Lagos, all to lace up the topic tonight.
Infrastructure is essential to daily living, from individual road users, logistics firms, and public transportation agencies all make use of the roads for their survival. According to the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing, Lagos has a total of 70 federal roads and 31 bridges. Out of that number, 11 roads and 5 bridges have works ongoing. These include projects such as the Lagos-Ibadan, Lagos-Badagry, Lagos-Abeokuta, Apapa-Oshodi Oworojoki, and Ikorodu-Jagamu expressways, as well as the third mainland bridge.
The intention is to still maintain this road, take it back to its original form.
Government has also provided funding, special funding for some major roads, of which Lagos-Ibadan is one. Which is to be funded from the NSIA, funds. So with that, I think about $650 million has been set aside for Lagos-Ibadan and some other critical projects.
These developments are targeted at reducing the burden of traffic, leading to loss of man-hours.
One-way handling is about 3.6 billion, and it's for 18 months. They have started installing some drainage works along the road, especially at Agbara, towards the end of the project.
Aside these, the state government, in complementing the federal government's efforts, recently declared a state of emergency on its roads.
It's to construct the road, but they should tell the contractors to speed in the work.
When they are constructing roads, they should
try and build alternative routes so that it doesn't create too much traffic. I think it should work more in the night.
The huge investments in these road infrastructure underscores the priority placed by the federal government in having more motorable roads befitting Nigeria's mega city. In Lagos, Dotsun Ogunyemi, NTA News.
And if you're just joining us, the program is Tuesday Live, and the focus is the Economic Stimulus Infrastructure Plan. We have taken reports on the power sector, and we had just finished one from Lagos on road infrastructure. Let's take a look, listen to this one from Jigawa State.
Factors might be responsible for the increased number of farmers in Jigawa State from 60% in less than half a decade ago to about 90% presently. High cost of living as a result of the recession Nigeria faced a couple of years ago has forced people to return to farm to at least produce food for themselves. Encouragement by federal and the state governments as well as agricultural organizations with loan facilities, farm implements, improved seedlings and fertilizer, and subsidized prices have been identified as bait farmers, including members of the elite groups and civil servants. The involvement of the elites in agriculture has no doubt motivated the peasant farmers to focus more on the business, but they also, like the peasants, need the support of the government to take the business to the next level.
So government should encourage large-scale farmers so that we will employ the people. So I think government should also look at us as part of this country, the people, to give us access to facilities like loans and so on, so that we can also diversify and grow and employ more people. Despite
these huge opportunities, farmers' slow adoption of changes and innovations brought to them by the government and non-governmental organizations with interest in agriculture to boost their yields remained a serious challenge to be dealt with.
Farmers are the main problem of Nigerian agriculture. Talk to them, they don't listen. When they listen, they don't act. When they act, they don't study it or continue with it. And they know very well the system is better than the previous system. But all the same, they will drop it because they do not care about profit or loss in the agricultural system.
The recent closure of borders by the Nigerian government has indeed boosted market opportunities for the local farm producers, a situation that may stimulate the interest of more people to return to the farm in Jigawa State. From Dutse, Muhammad Musa Askira, NTA News.
The conversation and our Twitter handle is open at Tuesday Live NTA. At some point, the line will be opened and you join the conversation through phone calls too. You raise your questions and concerns. But quickly before we left, the SSC President of Public Affairs gave us an overview. And Dr. Kengu said there's nothing wrong with borrowing. And Professor Kenfe gave us a technical breakdown of the indices globally and where Nigeria is regarding global competitiveness within the time frame we are discussing. Now, let me go to Ayobami Ayolowo. Now, value-created projects. There be projects within this time that do not have value, tied to the fact that somebody raised in one of the reports that borrowing is not the problem. What you do with the money borrowed remains the problem.
Thank you, Dan. I think, in fact, I would have thought we should even look critically at those projects and borrow a bit more. And I'll tell you why. The deficit in our infrastructure is so huge, it's about 40 years difference. And if you look at after, like the SSA said, for us to be competitive in terms of the economy we're competing against, we must have critical infrastructure so that we will not be a dumping ground. Rather, we will be one of the forefront countries where some of these factories and industries will be located. And I'll tell you the advantages. I was in South Africa some time ago and I was talking to people. I realized that why we buy second-hand cars here, most of them use brand new cars. And you know why? Because instead of importing those cars, all the major car manufacturers are located in South Africa. So one guy that I saw, this is a guy that typically in Nigeria will not even be able to drive, not an insult, a Toyota Corolla, was actually driving a Mercedes-Benz E350, brand new. And I was, how did you do it? When they told me the price, actually it's less than 6 million naira if you convert to naira. But if you want to buy the Tokumbo of that in Nigeria, it's about 14 million. Because you're going to import it in, you're going to pay all this. Now, the advantage is this. If we are able to develop our critical infrastructure, power, road, rail, and all other indices, companies can locate here, they'll be able to produce goods, and when it will be cheaper. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You should always learn to adapt it to your need. We have a population of close to 200 million. From the report of the World Bank that just came out, we have created about 450,000 jobs. But guess what? We have released new people into the market from NYC and stuff. So what will these guys do if infrastructure is not there and jobs are not there? You see, what rails will do for you, what electricity will do for you, is that it will create multiplier effect in your economy. You have a burgeoning population of under 30 at a huge number, and you do not have jobs for them. You know the danger you are creating. You are looking for. I mean, we read the news every day. You are seeing how young people are being busted for so many crimes because there are no jobs. So this infrastructure, I've read some of it. It will affect agriculture. It will affect health. It will affect education. About 18 federal universities will be upgraded. And what Adjo did not remember to tell you is that the Calabar rail will go from Calabar through on like rightly posited. I was with the MPMG sometimes back, and she told me that clearly all the rails now will either start or terminate at the port. So we are looking at decongesting first the Lagos port, but also giving life to our roads, because now you will not have cars running on the road. Most of the goods coming from the port will run on rail. Now that will go through on the Port Harcourt. It will go to Aba. It will.
No, those are
another one will
no,
another segment, but it's in this loan. It's captured in this. For Aba to
let him deliver. Finish. Okay.
Aba to Makurdi, through Bauchi, then Maiduguri, the standard gauge rail. So you look at, if that is not captured in that,
it's not.
Okay, it's 10 minutes at the One in Port Harcourt.
Yes,
just deliver.
Yes. Go ahead.
And that's about 3.4 billion on this, right? That's about the amount. Now you have 18 federal universities that will be upgraded from this particular loan. You have so many other projects that normally we should have done. I mean, the Mambila Plateau is part of it, been on IATA for over 40 years. Over 40 years. Now it is captured in this loan. So when you add power to what, I mean, you add more megawatt to what we already have, you now begin to talk about production. The challenge we've had in the past is that people will tell you, look, it's cheap to import goods because there's no power. Because by the time you factor the amount you spend on generator, on diesel, and everything into your cost of production, you are going to produce what I would have brought in from China or from wherever, 5 naira, you'll be producing for 15 naira. By the time you add everything, you are selling on 20 naira, you are completely not competitive. So those are the things that used to be addressed. And also healthcare. So typically you are looking at an economy that will be able to, in the next 5 years, compete with its peers. Looking at Ghana, South Africa, Egypt. I mean, in Africa, those are our peers. Now, if you have been to Egypt, you've applied some of their roads, you will understand why we need to do what we are doing. Our roads are in a terrible state. And you cannot build roads with your teeth. It is money. Okay. And finally, the advantage of this loan is every kobo is tied to a particular identifiable project. So you are not afraid that the monies will be stolen like they used to be done in the past. Okay. So what we, the people, need to do is ensure that we monitor, we see, and we understand. And some of the fear that have been generated on the social media and the hysteria, like he rightly posited, has been deliberate falsehood, misinformation, creating unnecessary fear and panic. Our loan to GDP is 25, I mean, it's just 21% or less as we speak right now. But beyond loan to GDP, we've heard about the fact that we're servicing our loans with so much of our budget. But what we needed to have been talking about, to start talking about, is how do we raise revenue? How will you raise revenue if you don't have infrastructure? If you don't have your ports are not working? If people bring in goods in Cotonou and they smuggle it in here? So if you have infrastructure, you will be able to raise revenue. And if you raise revenue, you can pay off your loans. That is what people need to focus on. But there have been this scaremongering, oh, our loan is heavy, oh, we have doubled it. It is a lie. These things will not work. We will not become a heaven on earth if we don't have infrastructure.
Let's proceed, because we need to get somewhere with this. I believe we're able to set the tone clearly, and we have to be going in and coming out. Now let's come off a bit. I tried to come up with the issue of inclusivity. Now, with all this, if the problem of inclusivity remains, then we may not drive home this. So looking at it, let's go to this. Let me quote this. On the perspective of inclusivity, they said, beneficiaries of economic growth over time have been politicians, workers in the oil and gas sector, high-level public officials, and executives of financial institutions. Vast majority of Nigerians over time, have been left out. Can we look at this? If this is not addressed within the ambit we are talking about, will it work? Let's address it.
Yes, well, thank you for raising that, because that's going to be foremost on the minds of our people, obviously, at a time of high unemployment. First of all, I want to just look at the issue of how it is that this economic stimulus plan is going to address inclusivity as we evolve the nation's economy away from oil and gas. Specifically speaking, in agriculture, there are a few priority projects within the economic stimulus plan. One is the agricultural transformation agenda, phase 2, right? What that's going to essentially do is it's going to now provide about $200 million in low interest capital to support our farmers and extension workers around the country, right? So now you're going to obviously have the access to capital is being addressed specifically for that sector, because we know that is the largest employment generator when we talk about the diversification of the nation's economy. Two other projects are very, very important. It's what we're calling the Stable Crops Processing Zones, SCPZ, Stable Crops Processing Zones. Now, why is that relevant? Because Nigerians have heard a lot about different types of zones in the country. What this is Mr. President is determined that now is the time to stop this decades-long trend of African countries sending their raw materials, whether it's wheat, cocoa, cassava, whatever it is, into Europe, into Asia. They now process and add value and refine and send it back to us at 4 times the cost, and we're paying Forex instead of a situation where we should be adding value ourselves, processing ourselves, and exporting so that we can earn Forex instead of paying Forex. Mr. President is changing that now. With the establishment of SCPZs, what you're now going to have, first of all, is a $100 million facility funded by the World Bank at about an interest rate. I think the maturity is about 25 years, the moratorium, again, about 5 to 7 years, and the interest rate is 1.1%. It's amongst the lowest of all of the loan of the projects involved in this package. What that is going to do is that is going to set up a hub for staple crops processing in the country. The reason why Kogi is particularly important in this is that it's the confluent state, right? Right now we just signed a $3.9 billion US dollar deal with the CRCC to build an $800 million port, a new seaport in Wari, because it links up with the Wari-Itakpe rail line. But what we're doing is we have a $3.1 billion deal to extend the Wari-Itakpe line up into Abuja, which will obviously eventually link with Lagos and link through to Kano, through Kaduna. So now Kogi is going to be, we're going to cut that through Itakpe, which is where the Nigerian iron ore mining company is, through Ajeokuta, where the iron ore will now be going to the Ajeokuta steel plant. Then from Ajeokuta, it will have a spur to Lokoja, which will now be the confluence, what we're talking about in terms of the stable crops processing zone, and then into Abuja, where we can now distribute around the country. All of that is stage 1, because we also have within the same package a $500 million facility with similar, very favorable loan terms that is going to set up a nationwide network of staple crops processing zones, which is going to ensure that we take our wheat, we take our cassava, we take all of these goods, and we process them into finished products that are ready for international markets from day one. That is part of what we're doing. Another thing that we're doing is we're taking these funds to establish 6 quarantine laboratories across the nation's 6 geopolitical zones which will essentially be standards equalization centers where we'll be able to quarantine now bad products. So for example, Nigerians complain about, stones in their rice, just for an example. So we're going to be able to now stop, screen everything, quarantine what is bad, put forward what is good into our domestic market and also for the international market, not just for the sake of it, but because we need to compete favorably with Thailand, with Vietnam, with Indonesia, and all of these countries that have already mechanized their agricultural processes. If we're going to compete with them for international market share, it's going to be because we have effectively screened and quarantined our agricultural goods, which we are increasingly producing, and eventually, after we meet self-sufficiency, for export. Now, that's on the agricultural side. On the issue of power, because it's been touched on in this conversation, you have multiple projects, right, that amount to approximately $5 billion and $600 million, $5.6 billion, right? Now, how that breaks down is you have about $4.8 billion US dedicated to the Mambila hydropower plant. Now, these high volume items like the Mambila hydropower project, Nigerians will naturally wonder, okay, what are the terms? Because ultimately interest on a high volume project like that is going to become very, very important. On the Mambila hydropower project, you have an interest rate of about 2.75%, extremely low. There's not a single project in this entire borrowing plan that even touches 5%. Everything is beneath 5%, and in fact, everything but 2 projects out of over 30 are beneath 4%. They're all within the range of 1 to 3%. Now, so just to finish on power, you have the 4.8 billion Mambila, then the other 800 and approximately, I think it's $814 million is separated between 3 different projects that are funded by 3 different multilateral agencies. The JICA, that's the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. They are producing a fund of approximately $200 million US for the upgrade of, $50 million US, my mistake, for the upgrade of 9 vocational training schools in the power sector across 5 geopolitical zones. The reason why that's important is because if we're going to build all of our power infrastructure across generation, transmission, and distribution, we must have the manpower. We can't continue to go to the Chinese, all of these other countries for our technological development and maintenance. So we are prioritizing our manpower development in all of these vocational training centers. And then the other funds of the 814 is you have a $300 million facility for TREP, which is the Transmission Rehabilitation and Expansion Program under the TCN. One of them is from World Bank at a 1.1% interest rate. The other one is from the French Agency for Development, AFD, of about $200 million. So within just transmission alone, transmission upgrades, we have about $500 million of low interest capital to expand our transmission. There's so much to get into, but I really hope that I'm going to be able to touch mining and education because those two are going to be game changers for the economy.
Try as much as that. Beautiful. Now, you can join the conversation. Our focus tonight is on the economic stimulus infrastructure plan. A couple of tweets have come in and our lines are open. The phone number is displayed on the screen. You can put in your call, but take a couple of tweets that have come in. And starting with the one from La Alpha, I throw that to some of the issues raised here are some of the questions we are supposed to address. So I take the first tweet on Dr. Kengo. Let this panel deliberate on the future economic implications of borrowing and borrowing to fix infrastructure. When this government can expand taxation to raise the funds internally and avoid the wise saying that you are a slave to your lender. Just quickly so that we can address that once.
Exactly what I was trying to say. That it doesn't make any sense that you borrow and you still go to borrow some more. It doesn't make any sense that we now start developing what you call debt servicing instead of now what you call debt payment. That's what he's saying. So if we are going to borrow, let us borrow to be able to complete these projects and then engage them. It is not enough for you to be able to build infrastructure. You must build what they call demand-driven and result-oriented infrastructure. Correct. Now, what is demand-driven infrastructure? It is where you now have what you call your value or your services. The moment you have services demanding infrastructure, your infrastructure, expansion, now becomes sustainable. But the moment you now have people saying, okay, because everybody has a bridge, let's also build a bridge. Everybody has this, let's do this. Okay, so you must tie your infrastructure, to services. And then you're talking about inclusive, let me just touch it very simply so that people can understand. Inclusivity means everybody benefiting. Now, 40 years ago, let me answer you. Abuja was like any other hamlet in Nigeria. True. The difference between a rural area and an urban area is infrastructure. They take infrastructure to the most remote part of Bakassi. Put light, put road, put hospitals, put schools. It becomes cosmopolitan immediately. So this is what infrastructure does to development. You cannot develop without infrastructure. But you also do not build infrastructure that is not demand driven. This is not where you get inclusivity. Again, you now talk about skills. The moment you are now able to move your human resources to skills, you now move them from human resources to what we call human capital. The only way you capitalize your human resources is to be able to give skill. Okay? Now, the difference between rich countries and poor countries are those, what they do with their natural resources and their human capital. The moment you have a population that is skilled, you have a population that can now begin to earn. You have a population that now becomes credit-worthy. So, all this is all about that. That's why when my brother, said, listen, can we be able to think this thing through? I know there's a lot of pressure. I know there's a lot of politics. What is important is to say all these projects that we're going to be doing now, this is the borrowing plan. It is not the debt servicing plan that should be uppermost in our mind. It should be the debt repayment plan based on the outputs, of the services that those infrastructure are going to be delivering. The moment we are able to deliver it, can I give an example before I leave? All these painted cups we are struggling to take home, what are they? Clay. What is this? Clay. What is this? Sand. Sand like you know it. Okay? Now, but it remains sand except you are able to put the technology that can be able to now convert this. Okay? And it is the same component that gives you your chandeliers. You go into a beautiful house, still sand. It isn't this that gives you your china, still clay. So it's important that Nigerians understand that when you say spend your way out of poverty, it does not mean you're throwing money at the problems. What that simply means is that you must be able to now identify those things that can be able to now move you from resource to skill and move you from resource to products. Okay? The moment you have two of this, you now start struggling for what you call your market share and then start playing in what they call PIER, Politics of International Economic Relations. That is where you now sit at the committee of the table.
Sit at the table, at the head of the table.
You still join the conversation, but for some logistic reasons, the phone lines are not going through tonight. It's the challenge. So if you want to join the conversation, please join us through at Tuesday Live NTA to the Twitter handle, please. Now, Prof, there are 3 tweets here that are related. Let me read them out, then you address them. Okay. Now, the first is from Kayode Awaka. Tuesday Live, there is nothing wrong in borrowing to fund critical infrastructure to increase our productivity, but the problem is borrowing to finance over-inflated cost of infrastructure. Nigeria is where you find the highest cost of building infrastructure. The next comes from strategic. I'm all for the borrowing as is the only way out of economic prison. Thank you for the choice of your panelists, analysts in the studio. I'm overjoyed to be part of this today. God bless you all. Then the one you have to respond to before I go to your other is, my fear with the borrowing is coming from Samuel, is our politicians. They will not judiciously use the funds in executing these projects. It will be looted in the preparation for 2023 elections. Your guests today are doing justice to the topic. So, address it before you go to your
The problems enumerated by those tweets are actually the problem that are being solved and addressed by this borrowing package. You see, when we say to the government, shift towards borrowing from development finance institutions, not just because the cost is low, the moratorium is in there, all the features, we're talking about 1.0 to 1.2%, phenomenal. I didn't even think Nigeria will ever get this. But you are going to borrow from World Bank, Africa Development Bank, they will not carry money and throw at you. It doesn't work like that. Okay. That project must be viable They must see how it's going to repay itself, and they must make sure that it is protected by law. They're not just going to give you money that will run into murky waters down the rain. They will have to. So, the law says capital projects for external borrowing. They will not give it to you to go and share on the street. They won't do it. So all those things about politicians, they won't dip their hand on that money. They won't, because there will be elaborate monitoring and evaluation framework, and they will follow you bumper to bumper. Exactly. It is only when you get money the other way around, maybe treasury bill or whatever, bilateral euro bond, then you will be singing and dancing. So I don't know about that. So that's what I say to the two, that yes, is discipline. There is discipline behind this level of borrowing from these sources. That's what I can say.
Okay, let me take the next before we go on break now. Quickly, Tunde Bell says, commend the patriotism of the analysts. Slowly and gradually, Nigeria will get to promised land. Many of electronic mediums are reading political meaning to it instead of its benefit to our land. Now, the next one says, borrowing is not what we are swearing about, but how to use, where to use, for what to use, and when to use this huge amount of money, and what impacts of this borrowing.
Well, we have almost answered some of them earlier on, because from what we have said, there must be demand projects that are really, really in demand. You need it. You won't just go build a bridge in Ekiti because Fayose thought everybody should have a bridge. You are looking at critical, for instance, the East-West Road has been there. We know the danger, we know the lives that have been lost there, and you know how it can connect the South-South to the Southeast, then how the second Niger Bridge can connect the Southeast to the other part of the country. You see how it works? So these are critical infrastructure that will service our nation, and you can now move in goods and services. See, the whole idea is this: if you have these projects that are being spoken about in place, you will be able to, one, if you cite an industry in any part of the country, you are very sure that your goods can get to any other part of the country. So you are looking at a demand project, because clearly you don't want to produce a car, for instance, in, let's say, Maiduguri, and then you are thinking of how you're going to move them to Lagos, or how you're moving them to Aba, and you cannot produce things in Aba. You are thinking, for the sake of God, how am I going to move these goods to Kano? So you have train stations, train or rail projects that are linking one part of the country to another part, to another region, moving around. If you see the way this rail system are being linked, you will be they are fantastic. So we are looking at projects that in the next 5-10 years, we will have a different kind of country. For heaven's sake, there was a day I was coming from Owerri to Abuja also. I was actually angry flying, because those are short distances that you shouldn't normally fly if you have a rail system that works. You've been to England. Nobody fly from Birmingham to London. There is a fast train that will take you 1 hour. So why do we, for the sake of God, fly some distances that you really don't need to? That's why you fly from Kano to Kaduna, because the roads are bad, because there are no rails. So these projects are critical. They will not just open the economy up. It will help our young people to have things to do. You can now say, look, if this company cannot cite your industry or your manufacturer in Nigeria, we don't want you. Because, like I said earlier on in my opening speech, I was in South Africa. People can drive good cars. Why do I have to buy Tokumbo and use cars from somewhere when the owners of those companies can actually cite their company here? One, it will create job. Two, you can even become the hub in this region. So why are we not thinking that way?
All right. You can join the conversation tonight via our Twitter handle @TuesdayLiveNTA. But we'll take a short break and be right back. Tuesday Live continues.
The attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals SDGs relating to primary and junior secondary education is being driven by the Universal Basic Education Commission, UBEC. The UBE program is providing free basic education for every Nigerian child of school-going age, with government's increased relevance through access, quality, and equity. That is not all. The UBE program is also ensuring the acquisition of ethical, moral, and civil values needed for a better society.
The struggle for independence had been a long and tough one. Our founding fathers and compatriots sacrificed their comfort and even shed their blood. We cannot at this point in history afford to spirit away their sacrifices for immediate but temporary gains of today. Let us emphasize what unites and not what divides us. Working for the unity of purpose with a stronger vision for a better tomorrow. NTA, growing with the nation.
Nigeria, the only country we can train with remarkable potentials to excel. Let us believe in ourselves and change our attitude for the sake of our country and generations unborn. Let us revive our